Billy Kuehl is the Senior Regional Liaison, Western United States for Uber. As one of Uber's law enforcement liaisons in North America, Mr. Kuehl's job is to engage law enforcement both proactively and reactively on all things related to Uber, including criminal investigations, on-platform incidents, and emergency situations. He educates law enforcement at the local, state, and federal level on how Uber works, the different modalities available on the platform, the data that is captured on Uber, how that data can be useful during a criminal investigation and/or critical incident, and future changes to the platform that could impact law enforcement. Lastly, he assists Uber's business operations when there are regulatory issues at play or they need to communicate changes that will affect law enforcement operations in a given market. Prior to Uber, Mr. Kuehl was with the U.S. Secret Service for 9 years in the Chicago field office. He worked criminal investigations involving financial crimes, counterfeiting, and protective intelligence. He spent 2 years on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force working on counterterrorism, national security-related issues, and as a liaison between the Secret Service and the FBI. During his career, he conducted several protection advances for the president, vice president, former presidents, former first ladies, and foreign dignitaries. Chad Sniffen is the Research and Evaluation Manager for Reliance and the Outreach Manager for the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. He is Reliance's lead expert on sexual misconduct and violence taxonomy and has worked extensively with corporations that use the taxonomy, including Uber and TripAdvisor. Chad has worked or volunteered in the movements against sexual and domestic violence as a prevention educator, victim advocate, researcher, women's self-defense instructor, and board member since 1999. Prior to Reliance and NSBRC, he worked at the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault and was focused on technical assistance to rape prevention education programs and building the Prevent Connect online community of practice. He has also worked for community rape crisis and domestic violence programs in California and Arizona, as well as campus prevention programs at the University of Arizona and the University of California, Davis. He earned a Master of Public Health degree from the University of Arizona in 2007. Billy and Chad, welcome. Please take it away.
Thank you, Sean, so much. I will share my screen and we'll get the presentation started. Thank you for that introduction. Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Hopefully you find some beneficial information from what Chad and I are going to talk about today. We'll start off with a little video that always eases everybody into presentation mode. So. Okay, so that's just a little intro into one of Uber's projects, transportation modalities that they're continually investing in and working on. Usually when I speak to my audiences, I kind of talk about what we joke would be the future, but is now a reality in the sense that a lot of transportation companies and auto manufacturers are investing in things like autonomous vehicles. And of course, that particular product, which would be literally like a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle that would take you from, one building top to another. Again, no one necessarily knows when this would be launched. I think there's some prospective dates, but it's just to give you an idea of sort of the growth and expansion of this, of the transportation market and where it is headed. As Sean has already pointed out, I'm part of the Uber law enforcement operations team. The slide you see here, that URL down at the bottom, that's our law enforcement portal. We're going to talk more about that later in the presentation. But our team specifically at Uber is focused on working with law enforcement to assist them when it comes to Uber-related incidents, whether critical in nature, ongoing criminal investigations, safety initiatives or issues, things that arise in certain marketplaces. Of course, top of mind is that is we're always working with and responding to with law enforcement are sexual assault investigations and incidents that either do or do not happen on the platform, and kind of how our data plays into those investigations. Slide's a little redundant. Sean already did a good job of giving my background. Just here, a little snapshot of what I did before I joined Uber almost 5 years ago. The purpose, behind our law enforcement background is, we provide that expertise and that experience, I should say, to both the business itself, providing advice and counsel on safety related issues and law enforcement related issues. And then of course, when we talk to law enforcement, it for lack of a better word, provide some street cred when you're talking to law enforcement, because we have that background. Just a breakdown of our regional coverage. I like to tease my teammates that geographically I cover most of the United States, but no, we've tried to divide it up in a way that kind of splits up the platform activity evenly amongst all of us, trips, deliveries, all that kind of stuff. We did have somebody based in Chicago, unfortunately, during COVID, when things first hit back in late March. It had a pretty drastic impact, and Uber had to kind of revisit its structure across multiple teams. And so we lost a teammate to layoffs. So we had to kind of redraw the lines here, but just so you're aware of, this is the liaison for whatever region you're coming from and who you'd want to contact. Chad?
Chad, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Oh, I said such smart things in that few seconds. So I'm Chad Sniffen. I'm the other presenter. I am wearing two hats for this presentation. So primarily, I'm the outreach manager for the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. I'm also the evaluation and research manager for Reliance, which is a partnership that we have with several other nonprofits. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what those two organizations are. So the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, if you're not familiar with it, we provide resources to mostly advocates and educators around the prevention and responding to sexual violence throughout the country. So we're a federally funded technical assistance center. We're a project of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape. And so that is my primary job, is helping to develop online content and manage online content and do outreach for the NSVRC. But the NSVRC also partners with the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault and the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence to do corporate consulting, actually, to do consulting to both corporations like Uber and to professional sports like the NFL and other professional sports organizations. And I'm in the business side of that. And so the things I'm going to be talking to you about are mostly what I do through Reliance Business. But as far as the National Sexual Violence Resource Center goes, we provide resources throughout the year, and especially focus on the National Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign, and also the National Sexual Assault Conference, which is another conference that you might have heard of, which was like CCAW, all virtual this year. And hopefully we hope to return to live conferences again in the future. And we also, another primary mission of the NSVRC is to help local agencies and state coalitions, and also state and federal RPE directors to kind of deal effectively with the media and with the public perception of sexual violence in general. So that's enough about me and NSVRC. And next slide. And so I'm basically going to talk to you about Uber's partnerships with nonprofits like ours and a tool that was survivor and advocate informed and trauma informed also, that Uber uses to help it to better look at the problem of sexual violence. And then Billy is going to go into a lot of information about law enforcement and how Uber interacts with law enforcement and tools that Uber has to help law enforcement and investigations, and in other things as well. Anything else you want to add about that, Billy? You're muted too, I think.
I'm mute. All right, we gotta. We'll fit
Yeah,
us two webinar veterans will figure this out at some point. All right.
right. So you're good with that? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we're just going to go into sort of some of the information regarding the Uber application and give you kind of broad overview of the different products available. All right, so, one of our slide favorites, one of our video favorites, our team's been showing that for a few years now. Of course, can't find that anywhere. Don't try. But joking aside, one of the things to look at there is, just throwing an Uber placard in front of on your dash or, on your wagon or your trailer doesn't mean you're an Uber. And, we'll talk about that later, but it kind of speaks to the fact that just the growth and expansion of Uber as a product has meant that, it's made it, more accessible for folks that are going to do something criminal or something nefarious. They kind of pull up and act as the Uber, or they applied and did one trip and kind of threw a placard in their dashboard to appear as an Uber driver. This slide right here, kind of shows all the different products that are available on our Uber app as a rider, right? As a customer, you download that app, you create an account, and you're going to have access to, give or take some of these not so much, but, obviously rides, right? Everybody on the call, I'm sure, is familiar with rides. Potentially, I'm assuming I can almost guarantee that you've used Rideshare, whether Lyft or Uber in some capacity. Whether or not you're commuting with it every single day, like, a lot of folks are in big cities. But if you've traveled personally or professionally, a lot of people have, even my parents, shockingly, have come to realize the convenience of requesting a ride and having someone come pick you up. But, in this sort of post-COVID world that hopefully I'm sure we all hope is temporary in nature, rides is, definitely kind of declined to some extent, right? With travel down and tourism, professional business travel is down. So things like Uber Eats has picked up dramatically, right? People staying home more, getting a lot more food delivery. That has increased across all markets. It was growing exponentially before. That a lot of these kind of stay-at-home orders and lockdowns came into play, but it's increased even more so. A couple of new things on there: Direct and Connect. So Uber is launching and has launched, say, like Connect is a product where you can request that items be delivered to your house, right? Let's say you're buying something on OfferUp, or you're delivering something to somebody. You can request an Uber driver come pick up that product and take it to the delivery location, or vice versa, send the Uber to pick up the thing that you've just purchased and bring it to you, right? So that peer-to-peer delivery service, that's relatively new. It's in a handful of cities in the United States. I would assume, as people become more aware, it will grow. Uber Direct, grocery delivery, I'm sure we've all used some form of that, maybe in some capacity. The Uber's starting to build up a product on this front where, you order your groceries and you can have an Uber driver go pick it up. Uber Air, we talked about. You're not going to get that. You're not going to see that on the app anytime soon. But they actually do have a helicopter option in New York. It's the equivalent of taking an Uber Black from Lower Manhattan to JFK. So I think it's a couple $100. You can take a helicopter at certain times of the day. It's pretty limited, and that's just them kind of testing the product itself. And it's not what you see in the video; it's an actual helicopter. Uber works, right? So drivers and such who are on the platform and want to be available for shift work at different businesses, right? Where they're looking to fill in personnel that that can't make it, sick, called out, whatever it is, need increased personnel for events and things like that. That's where Uber works come in. Uber for Business, corporate product, really, but a great way for your corporation, small, medium, large, you can utilize to have like a centralized billing location for all of your Uber activity for your employees, right? So it's basically, I manage this from one central app. Everybody else is logged into their account in their Uber app, but they are associated with my U for B account for my business. So now everything's centrally billed and I can go in and see where they're going and where they're, how they're utilizing the platform when they're traveling. And then lastly, Uber Freight, commercial shipping, super interesting sort of expansion for the Uber business. That's been going on for a few years, still growing. May or may not come into play. We obviously talk to law enforcement about at some point, we prepared to see whether it's moving of contraband or trafficking of some kind. But at this point, our nexus to law enforcement has been, stolen property, damaged trailers, that kind of stuff. Chad?
Okay, found my unmute button. So, so along with a lot of different types of business. Oh, go back one
Sorry.
slide.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay. So along with a lot of different types of business, Uber is in a lot of different places. So Uber is a global company, and no surprise to any of us, I'm sure. Uber encounters the problem with sexual violence everywhere it does business, right? Because there is sexual violence is a human problem, and everywhere that Uber does business with humans, this problem impacts a business in some way. And so, and those aren't always the same ways, around the world. So Uber partners with a lot of different nonprofits and NGOs around the world who work in gender-based violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, to help to develop responses to the way that sexual violence impacts sexual violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, a lot of harms, the way that those harms impact the platform and the business that Uber does around the world. I'm going to talk to you about a partnership that they have with us here in North America that starts in North America, but actually impacts their entire system throughout the world. So next slide. One more slide. There you go. All right. So I already told you about NSCRC and Reliance. So here's the origin story of this product. So in 2017, at the end of 2017, Uber approached the National Sexual Violence Resource Center because they had a problem. That problem is the way that they measured how sexual violence happens on their platform, right? So the system that Uber had at the time was basically the system that you would have if you asked a software engineer to think about sexual misconduct and sexual assault, and then develop a system to measure that, to count that, which means that it was a perfectly fine system, but it wasn't terribly informed by experience with the problem, and it definitely wasn't giving them the data that they needed, right? So they came to us as experts in the topic area of sexual violence to help them develop a better system, and we in turn looked at the problem and said, hey, we're experienced advocates, we're experienced educators, but we're not so experienced researchers, and there was definitely a research component to this. So we and Uber partnered with the Urban Institute, which is another nonprofit social research organization that they specifically focus on research in areas that impact social policy, and one of those being sexual violence. And so, so the NSVRC and Urban, and eventually Reliance, when we brought our other partnership, our other partners in Reliance into the project, in our first year at the end of 2017, we decided that this was a problem that we wanted to help Uber with, and that was not an easy decision. If I don't know if anyone remembers the end of 2017 anymore. It's hard to remember anything past the beginning of this year. But at the end of 2017, there was a lot of bad things going on associated with Uber, right? So there was a problematic former CEO. There was problematic things that had happened under that CEO related to the topic of sexual violence. There was the Delete Uber movement at the time. And so we were wondering, would this impact our credibility to work with Uber at that point? And we were already a part of their safety board. So they had already started to bring nonprofits to help them on the problem, how they deal with the issue, various nonprofits from around the country. But we decided it was important for us to work with Uber. And the next slide will express why. So this is my boss, Karen Baker. She's the CEO of both the National Sexual Violence Resource Center and of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape. And this is a quote from a report we did about the taxonomy. With better information about sexual violence comes the opportunity to know which programs, policies, and practices have the most impact on prevention efforts, knowledge that brings us closer to our common goal of a future built on safety and respect. So here's the thing with Uber. Uber is a massive company. And this was a few years ago, actually, I think in 2019 or 2018, Uber had 15 billion rides on its platform. Now, of those 15 billion rides, a tiny fraction involved any kind of element, a tiny fraction of complaints about, so of 15 billion rides, there were complaints about a tiny fraction of them, and a very, very small fraction of those complaints involved some type of sexual misconduct or sexual assault. A very, very, very small fraction of those complaints, involved some type of actual completed or attempted sexual assault. But at the scale of 15 billion, a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of 15 billion is still a big chunk of data, right? And so that's the thing with Uber, is that Uber is a very large company that is a data-driven company that gathers a lot of data related to the topic that we care about, sexual violence, and also domestic violence and human trafficking. And by helping them get better at using that data and collecting that data, we help the whole field and the whole topic, right? And it helps us all to get to where we want to go. And so we recognize that it was really important actually to work with Uber because of scale, because no nonprofit is going to do 15 billion of anything at any given year, right? That's not nonprofit scale, that's corporate scale. So if we don't work with corporations that do operate at that scale, we're going to miss an important opportunity to impact the issue that we care about. So that's why we decided to work with Uber. So next slide. And so this is just in general, this is actually cut out from a much longer presentation. But in general, what is this taxonomy that I talk about? So it's the formal name is the Sexual Misconduct and Violence Taxonomy. We have now come to realize taxonomy was not a great name to give this thing, but that is the name that we all use now. So we just call it the taxonomy. What the taxonomy is, and I'll go into a little bit more detail after the slide, but in general, it's a way to help tie the right response to the right incidents that response is meant to engage, right? So when we first, so we had several drafts of the taxonomy. It took us over a year to develop. And at first it was this great research tool. There was over 40 different categories that really we had looked at hundreds and hundreds of tickets that Uber had received that had some element of sexual violence in them, and developed buckets for every kind of incident. And that 40 plus category taxonomy was super hard to use, because Uber has to use it at scale, right, in a customer service setting. And it really didn't matter. So a lot of the differences between the buckets, some of the buckets were so minor that Uber would respond to them in the same way. So really, we had to modify the product that we developed to help create categories that would give Uber a chance to have the right response to that type of incident. And I'll go into that in a little bit, what that means in a little bit more in a few more slides. Also, it helps to, the taxonomy would tracks both criminal behavior. Some of the behaviors are criminal, but most of them are not criminal. Most of the behaviors we track in the taxonomy, you would never get arrested for, or if you did, you would never get charged for, right? And so, and that is really the vast majority of sexual misconduct and sexual violence that happens every day and that people experience every day. It is not criminal, but certainly ruins their experience, ruins your day, and ruins your interaction with a product, right? It makes you less likely and less willing to use Uber or really other forms of public transportation. And so, the non-criminal behaviors are they're not, I don't want to say they're just as important, but they are also important, as the non-criminal behaviors are also important to creating a better ride and a better experience and a safer experience in communities and in your life. The system helps Uber to have a better understanding of the user experiences and to also help develop better policies and practices. And so this is what the final taxonomy looked like, in that there's two big buckets, sexual misconduct and sexual assault. There are mostly non-criminal. Some of the lower ones on the scale are often criminal in many states and many communities on the misconduct side, but staring and leering is not usually criminal. Asking personal questions or making comments about someone's appearance is not usually criminal. But these are unwanted experiences on a ride, right? They have to be sexual in nature to land on the taxonomy, and they create a bad experience for everyone. And there's things that we want to that we want to move away from in society. So that's the sexual misconduct side. And then the sexual assault are really contact offenses. So either attempted contact offenses or completed contact offenses. And so the sexual assault is what Uber reports about publicly, even though it tracks both sexual misconduct and sexual assault. But the sexual assault things are, of course, the things that we also care about and are very important in terms of everyone's perception of safety and everyone's perception of safety in their community. So if you want to go to the next slide. So what is this tool that we developed, what it is and what it's not? So I've just given you a broad overview of it, and then and why I'm talking to you about this at all will be apparent in the next slide. So, so this is a tool that is designed for a customer service environment. It's not designed to like meet your Clery Act requirements if you're a university. It's not designed to meet your UCR requirements if you're a law enforcement agency. It is designed for businesses that operate, you know, in the world to be able to look at things that happen in the context of their business and create a better, safer experience. So it's designed for a customer service environment. That's why it includes non-criminal categories. Also, what was really important about it is that it uses behaviorally specific definitions to figure out how things land in a category. So behaviorally specific means that we don't rely on people self-identifying an act as harmful or self-identifying an act as rape or some other salacious act. We look at the behavior that they're reporting, and we use the behavior to say, this is what happened, regardless of how the person talks about it, which is also challenging because people don't always talk in terms of behaviors when they make these reports, but that is what we try to get at. And behaviorally specific questioning and categories is a really important feature of research in sexual violence, so that's why it was important for us to do that. And also, we have the census is not an investigative tool. It is not important to the tool to determine the veracity necessarily of the report. It's important to respond to the report in a way that is good for the person who made the report and good for the business and good for the overall experience. So we assume that these reports are true, right? We don't have to prosecute based, or we don't even have to charge based on these reports, right? That's not the role of Uber to do that. So we assume that the way that the incident was reported is a true report, and that's what goes into statistics that Uber reports, and that is what goes into the response. Also, and this is not entirely true actually, but with the taxonomy tries to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, which means that every incident should fit into one category. And the reason why that's not completely true is because we often don't get enough information from a reporter to know what actually happened, but we can kind of make indications, right? But that is the way that we tried to design the taxonomy make it mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. And we're still actually working on the taxonomy and revising the taxonomy to improve that aspect of it. And just quickly, what it's not an investigative tool. It's also not, you know, set in stone. We have already made changes, and Uber has already made changes to the published taxonomy that we will be publishing relatively soon. As an updated version, and that is just because, you know, the more you use something, the more you figure out what works and what doesn't, and so that's what we've done. Also, it is something that multiple companies now use. TripAdvisor uses it publicly. Another ride-sharing company, two other ride-sharing companies use it, and other companies that aren't in ride-sharing also use it. And that was actually part of the goal of taxonomy, is for this to be one way for businesses to count the same problem, so that you can compare numbers, right? So you can actually have an understanding of what is the problem of sexual violence like across industries, not just within one specific company with one specific business model. And like I said, you know, we originally had quite a comprehensive map to all kind of subcategories of sexually violent activities. But not all, you know, the distinctions between those aren't all meaningful in the customer service setting. And so it is not a comprehensive map to everything that can happen, but it is a comprehensive kind of bucketing and categorization of all the things that can happen. And so next slide. And so what does Uber do with the taxonomy? And I think actually if you can go to the next slide after this too, that gives me some of the talking points. So Uber uses taxonomy to count incidents, and at the time I made the slide, actually they had not yet published, but they have published since, and I'll put a link to that document in the handout that you'll get later. Published a report about all of the incidents that happened, all the sexual violence incidents, sexual misconduct, sexual assault related to that were counted by the taxonomy that happened, and they have released that in a public report. Other companies are also are going to release incidents that they use the taxonomy to count in public reports. And so this has really had a positive impact from my perspective on talking about the issue of sexual violence and talking about how much sexual violence happens in our community, and that sexual violence happened before Uber was created and happens and did not get any worse necessarily because Uber was created. And that is a problem that is shared across industries and is shared across ride sharing, shared across the gig economy. It is a human problem of societies. And that because we have access to companies like Uber and data-driven companies, we can get actually better information about the social impact of sexual violence, sexual harassment, domestic violence and trafficking in all the places that these companies operate. And so then the next slide. And so just one more back. Yeah, there you go. And so I mentioned earlier that when we slimmed down the taxonomy, Uber was able to tie specific types of harms to specific types of response. And also something I didn't mention is that what we found in the data and what Uber reported on in their safety report is that riders have almost as much, in terms of incidents, there are about 50-50 riders harming drivers and drivers harming riders, which this wasn't our initial perception. I don't think it's the public perception. I think the public perception is mostly drivers harming riders. But, if you're a rider and Uber driver, you have a lot of, if you're an Uber driver, you have a lot of vulnerability as someone getting into your car, right? Because you can't necessarily abandon your car and you have a job to do, right? So there's a lot of harm that goes both ways, which is, again, a human problem, not necessarily an Uber problem. But one of the opportunities that we got through Uber and that RAIN, another nonprofit that I'm sure you're all familiar with, partnered with Uber on to develop is when certain types of behaviors are reported in the system, kind of by the taxonomy and reported to Uber, Uber has an opportunity to respond to the person who committed that harm, because really not all harms deserve, even from a safety perspective, being kicked off the platform, right? So if a driver makes an unwanted comment to a rider, or more often actually a rider makes an unwanted comment to a driver, that doesn't necessarily, kicking that person off the platform doesn't necessarily help anybody, right? But sending an educational module to that person, helping them to understand why what they did was inappropriate, that does not only help that person, the person who did the harm, but it also helps society, right? Because it at least sends the signal that what they did was inappropriate. And it helps them to understand, even if they don't learn anything from the module, they get a better signal that they shouldn't do that behavior, right? And so really, Uber has created a great opportunity for, to really help the problem of sexual violence that we're all trying to deal with. And Uber is also partnered with RAIN on some other things, and I'll let Billy talk about that.
Oh yeah, thanks, Chad. Chad crushed all of my best talking points, so I got nothing left. Just kidding. No, that was super informative and actually some great information for me to hear on my end as well. And just to play off of this slide a little bit on what Chad's talking about, one of the big announcements as part of our safety report from last year is that Uber launched a partnership with RAIN to develop a hotline, which has since gone live in select number of cities, 5 cities across the United States in May of this year. And what that is if individuals who contact Uber to report sexual assault, reporting it to us, right, which is often the case, and this is how all this information that Chad's talking about, we have developed over the years, is from the individuals reporting to us, and or clearly, obviously, law enforcement as well as our other source of information when these reports and these incidents come in. When that individual contacts us and says, "I've been a victim of sexual assault," they engage with our incident response team at Uber, who basically handles the whole critical customer support process. Now with this RAIN partnership, they are offered the opportunity to speak to a RAIN specialist about all the advocacy resources and safety resources available to them as victims and survivors of sexual assault. So it's a great partnership. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where given the current landscape in the media revolving around COVID-19, the protests, politics, and things like that, it was really hard for Uber to kind of take advantage of this great opportunity to kind of promote this effort. So you may or may not have seen this, but this is live in 5 major markets in the United States. And Uber is very excited about having this resource available to those who contact us as victims of these sexual assaults. And our team definitively has been working towards a law enforcement component or solution that would sort of be offered or run parallel to this resource, where we're trying to develop a process where we can kind of streamline efforts if a victim indicates that they, you know, have already spoken to law enforcement or intend to. Then our team could help and kind of make the process more efficient for law enforcement to obtain the data related to that incident. All right, so now we're going to go into the Uber law enforcement operations side of the house, and we'll kind of go through. I'll give you a quick snapshot of what our presentation looks like to law enforcement. Hopefully there's some law enforcement folks in the crowd that can benefit from this. Even if you're not in law enforcement, I think it's beneficial to see how Uber has invested in this team, because ultimately what it does is it continually improves the safety of our product across all products, across all modalities, because, you know, again, riders and drivers are reporting, you know, incidents to us via our critical customer support line, and then basically our only other resource for this type of information is when law enforcement contacts us through our law enforcement portal and says, hey, I've received a report of, you know, a sexual assault, or I'm investigating this incident, I'm looking into this, you know, I'm working on this criminal investigation. And that also clearly helps us understand how many of these incidents that are reported to us by riders and drivers end up going to law enforcement, how many are we not made aware of by law enforcement, or how many that were made aware of by law enforcement that riders and drivers have yet to talk to us about, because maybe sometimes they go straight to the police. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. Another video, hopefully it's well timed to keep everybody primed and
Be here in 4 minutes.
Are you kidding me?
No, it looks like he took a wrong turn. Don't worry, this guy's got like a 4-star rating. We're good. His name's Randy. That's like one of the most trustworthy names.
Ordering a getaway car with an app?
Are you Randy?
It's me.
Awesome.
Surprising. What's not surprising? How much money Aaron saved by switching to Geico.
Everybody comfortable with the air tab?
I could go a little cooler.
Okay.
15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
If you
All right, so it's a video we've been showing for a long time. It's a great one. It's funny. Also have to give kudos to the Geico ad campaign, right? Because they never fail in making me laugh. The whole crux of that video, and you know, the principle behind it is very interesting, because as funny as it is, it's really one of the first things that our team started handling, managing with law enforcement and with the business, is criminals utilizing the platform to flee the scene of an incident or, you know, a crime, order an Uber for a victim, maybe it's a sexual assault victim, you know, homicide suspects fleeing the scene of a crime, vehicle fatalities, things like that, hit and runs, whatever you want to call it. When people started to realize that, hey, not only is the Uber ride good for, you know, getting a quick and fast and efficient pickup from a restaurant or a bar or the airport, now I know, hey, I can pull up this phone. Our team was kind of basically born out of that dynamic. The business side was like, hey, we're, you know, and to Chad's point, it's the volume of rides, the fraction of incidents that happen on the platform that have safety related issues is incredibly small. But to Chad's point, the number itself can be relatively large relative to the actual number of trips that Uber is doing. So, you know, the business side of Uber was like, we need to bring in some folks that have some background in this area so that they can talk to law enforcement, they can educate law enforcement, and then they can manage these incidents as they're ongoing. And for as new as this was to everybody, to users, to riders, drivers, to Uber, to kind of see how this played out, you know, this was new to law enforcement. They're dealing with, you know, cab drivers, cab companies that are kind of quasi public private entities, where they maybe have access to different levels of information, to now you have a private rideshare company coming in and people are getting picked up in Honda Accords and Ford Fusions, and law enforcement kind of want to know, sorry about someone's dog barking in the background, want to know, hey, how do I get this information? What information is available to me? What information do you capture when a rider takes a ride, when a driver is on platform, when a driver turns on their app, turns off their app, you know, eats, food deliveries, where is that captured? What about the restaurant? All that stuff. So again, our mission statement, to make our mobility platform that law enforcement trusts the most via engagement, partnership, and response. We'll talk about our law enforcement response team as well. That's going to be where law enforcement's going to go. It's the single point of contact for law enforcement as it relates to Uber. It's going to be where your emergency requests go. It's going to be where your subpoenas, your warrants, your court orders, all that gets submitted, your preservation requests, and we'll talk through some of that. Here's our sort of our global outreach and response, map. Some of this has been kind of slightly adjusted just based on recent layoffs and whatnot, but for the most part, this captures our coverage. As you see, our team in the United States and North America, we have a liaison situation in Toronto that covers all of Canada. As you saw the map before, I cover the Western United States. And then we have our outreach manager in DC who covers the Northeast. And then we have another liaison that covers the Southeast all the way as far west as Texas. And then again, Latin America, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa. And I, as I always put it, all those liaisons are doing the same job that I'm doing, the same mission, the same effort. They all have law enforcement backgrounds, just a different set of circumstances, right? It's a different context. So dealing with law enforcement in Sub-Saharan Africa is vastly different than it is dealing with law enforcement in the state of California, where there's probably, 1,000 police departments or more in the state of California, all with its own little separate set of issues depending on the size of the market. Whereas in Sub-Saharan Africa, there might only be 50 police departments, but they're nationalized, right? And so you're dealing with a law enforcement agency that covers the entire country. And so it presents a totally different set of challenges, but everybody's focused on the same goal. And in fact, when we meet and we discuss, we all kind of share stories, and you'd be surprised how similar the engagement and the interaction is with law enforcement and the issues that arise. Here's a snapshot of some of our partnerships that our team, our Uber law enforcement operations team, has really doubled down on and invested in, that have really provided great, long-lasting relationships and good investment in, in safety with law enforcement and with other entities as well. IACP, obviously, that's been a great one for us, where our team our whole international team comes together. We've been presenting at Crimes Against Children conference in Dallas, every year up until, of course, this year with all the changes in these virtual conferences. IACLEA Campus Law Enforcement is one we've been doing for a while. We've been working with them, but we recently sort of reinvested in a big way. We partnered with our policy team internally and our communications team at Uber to kind of double down on this effort after we saw that there was, for as much as we were doing, there was a real opportunity for us to engage at the campus level, both with campus safety and with law enforcement. And that really kind of came to light after the incident in South Carolina, where the individual got into the wrong Uber and then unfortunately was murdered later that night. And it was really one of those opportunities for us to be like, hey, I think the education both to, campus, to university students, and also to campus law enforcement, that this is how Uber works. And this is the information, and this is the data, and this is the safety that you can count on when it comes to Uber, was really important, something for us to invest in. And then, Fraternal Order of Police, working with law enforcement, just showing our support, ECPAT, MAD, WIFL. So, and we've also recently doubled down on our human trafficking initiatives as well. That's kind of a nascent thing in terms of how our team is going to kind of plug in. We've done some outreach and some safety tips we've worked internally with other teams at Uber to provide safety tips and information, resources to drivers to recognize, what it looks like, what a victim looks like, in terms of indicators and things like that. We really want to heavily invest in this on the investigative side to kind of work with law enforcement. We have an investigations team at Uber that works corporate investigations that have started to touch on some human trafficking investigations. And we're just starting to kind of hopefully work our way into what our data looks like as it relates to human trafficking investigations. So that's an ongoing effort on our part, and that's something that we're sort of recently reinvesting our focus on. Safety in the app today. This is just some of the features, that we'll highlight. We like to highlight. Check your ride. So if you've used Uber, when the driver accepts your ride request, you're going to get picture of the driver, name of the driver, make, model, color of the vehicle, license plate of the vehicle. That's going to come right away as soon as the driver accepts. And then while the driver's en route, you're going to get a re-notification from the Uber app saying, hey, please check this information before you get in the car. We hammered this home even to our law enforcement audiences, because we know law enforcement is often doing outreach to the public, right? They're walking up and down, they're doing sidewalk beats, in front of restaurants and bars and, areas that are very busy, major markets, big cities. And if they're aware and they know how this information works and they can educate, or they can help somebody utilizing the Uber platform, that's even better. I always kind of say, we'll get the question sometimes about it, is there, what other safety products is Uber working on? Uber's always trying to develop something. I will say they're constantly looking at all the different ways that they can kind of ensure that the rider and the driver, that the rider gets into the right vehicle. But, I like to remind everybody that before this, you were raising your hand and getting into, a yellow cab and getting into the back seat. And there really wasn't a whole lot of information you had on that individual or the company that you were using. With this, Uber is effectively saying this is the person that and the vehicle that you should be getting into the car with. Oftentimes, we tell law enforcement, if the person gets into the right car and then worst case scenario, something bad does happen, at least we have all the data related to that incident and can provide that to law enforcement. When somebody gets into the wrong vehicle, we're not going to have any information on who that person is and where they're headed. Ride check, right? It's related to car accidents, so that's like a telematics feature. So the entire ride, everything about the Uber platform is effectively based on the driver's phone. So when the driver turns his or her app on, that's when the GPS data starts to be collected as the driver's phone is pinged to know where the driver is in relation to rider requests. And then also that's how they measure and calculate, routes, fares, all that kind of stuff is the driver's phone. And so if there's a change in the driver's phone activity, an abrupt slowdown or a speed up or whatever it is, that telematics feature can show that, and then we'll prompt a question to the rider and driver like, hey, were you involved in a crash? Lastly, 911 assistance, where a software called Rapid SOS has been integrated into police dispatch centers, public safety answering points. If you call 911 from our app, if you utilize the 911 feature in the safety toolkit, and Rapid SOS is fully integrated into that dispatch platform in that market, your real-time location will be automatically shared with the computer display of the dispatch who's assisting you. So you call 911, boom, like as your phone call pops up onto their computer screen, so will the lat and long ping and the vehicle information of the Uber you're in will be immediately shared. So this is our law enforcement response team. I hammer this home to law enforcement. This is your one-stop shop for all things law enforcement resources, is alert.uber.com, specifically for emergencies. I don't mean this like I don't do anything at Uber, but I do mean it in the sense that if you're dealing with an emergency situation, don't waste the step of emailing me or calling me, trying to contact me and say, hey, Billy, we have this situation. What can you do? I can do very little at that point. Our law enforcement response team can do everything. So skip the step of calling me and go straight to the portal, go to alert.uber.com and submit an emergency request and say, I'm dealing with the following XYZ information. We are looking for account information on the following phone number, or we're looking for any and all trips that originated or ended at this location. We're looking for account information with the following license plate. They will respond within minutes, confirming the receipt of your request. And then inside of 30 minutes, they'll have whatever data, if it exists, related to your request pushed out to you. And that's specifically as it relates to emergency requests. It's 24/7. But they're the team that responds to all of your legal process requests, your warrants, your subpoenas, your court orders, your preservation requests for data. Preservation requests can also serve as a confirmation that data exists. So it's a great feature for law enforcement to be aware of. And now this team also handles public health requests. That process was starting to get built out over clearly a much smaller outbreak of, I think, like measles or something. I forget which city this took place in, but there was a meeting that happened with some public health authorities, and it's like, hey, what type of information can Uber offer related to these types of requests? And then when COVID hit, it was clearly a need to expand the portal to provide this resource to public health authorities. And so this response team is dealing with public health authorities requesting information related to the spread of COVID-19 and any other infectious disease, contact tracing investigations, and also what they've been doing since their inception, which is law enforcement response. Very busy. There has been a significant backlog in requests over the last several months, but the team has been incredibly persistent at chipping away at that backlog, and they're almost, they're almost at zero, probably with the next month or so, which is very impressive, but they are busy. So do be patient when you submit your warrant or your subpoena. I do think they treat public health requests as exigent. So when they get those usually are prioritized, similar to a request from law enforcement as an exigent request. We're just going to touch on the Uber Ride app. This is a snapshot of kind of how the process works. And again, I think most of you used it. There's a lot of features in here built in that I think are helpful to know from a safety perspective. Account creation on the rider side is super simple. Create a name for your account. It can be anything you want it to be: phone number, email address, payment method. Drivers have to apply, right? They are independent contractors, but they do apply to be drivers because they have to go through a background check process. So with the data we have on drivers as far as accounts go is much more voluminous. Just keep that in mind when you're looking for information. Rider opens his or her app to request a trip. Sometimes, so GPS information on rider apps is captured really only when the rider's interacting with the phone, and it's intermittent at best. And a lot of times it's cached from their last known location of when they interacted with the app. So GPS information on the rider app is not totally reliable. GPS information on the driver app is very reliable because as soon as the driver turns his or her app on to start accepting trip requests, that GPS data information is being collected. Rider can choose starting point and end point of the trip. A lot of times we're probably using that for ourselves. So we're picking a drop-off point, but we just want the Uber driver to pick us up where we are. But that said, it's a great feature to be able to send an Uber to pick somebody up at the airport or pick them up at a restaurant to bring them to you or whatever it is. But of course, from a criminal standpoint, we've seen this utilized in human trafficking situations, even like online solicitation for like sexual assault victims, right? Even underage victims sending Ubers, chatting online and then saying, hey, I'm going to send an Uber to pick you up, right? That type of situation. So we try to remind law enforcement, and then also things like, narcotics investigations, sending Ubers to pick up packages and things like that. So I'm trying to think of, we've talked about push notification, make, model, color, license plate. Rider and driver can communicate via app, text, or call, right? So as soon as the driver accepts your rider request, the two of you can engage in conversation, right, to provide updates on maybe the person getting picked up has moved locations, whatever it may be, or why is it taking so long, depending on the situation. Those, and you may already know this, pretty simple, but we still try to remind everybody because it's obviously an important feature to remember. Those phone numbers are anonymized. So if you make a phone call to the driver makes a phone call to you. Phone numbers are never exchanged, right? So if there's an investigation, if it's sexual in nature, and it's a sexual assault investigation, and someone's saying, well, this is the phone number, that should probably provide the next line of question, which is to say, oh, how'd you get the driver's phone number? Or how'd you get the rider's phone number? Just something to keep in mind because we anonymize it. So they're never actually exchanging phone numbers utilizing our app. Text messaging is done through the app as well. So that's not shared. Those phone numbers are not shared through text messaging either. Another thing to think about is obfuscation of like trip information on the driver app side. So if a driver pulls up his or her trip history within their driver app and they're looking at their trips for whatever reason, they're not going to have access to, they'll have access to the trips that they've done, but when they pull up a specific trip, it's not going to say, I picked Billy up, that it's not going to say that trip started at 4726 East LaMarche Avenue in Phoenix, Arizona. It's going to be obfuscated and show some sort of generalized, sort of city block type information. And that's just a way for drivers not to be able to sit there as they drive and do hundreds and hundreds of trips and thousands of trips on the platform, to be able to keep a database of specific addresses where they picked up and dropped off riders. Again, to Chad's point that he pointed to earlier, when the safety report was released, There were almost as many incidents reported of rider on driver assaults and safety related incidents as there were driver on rider. But these are just features that kind of help keep things safe across all fronts for both, earners and riders. Payment method, credit cards, stored value cards, right? Gift cards you can utilize. You can also use like digital forms of payment, Apple Pay and whatnot. Trip receipts, there's always going to be a trip receipt. So if you're not super familiar with utilizing Uber, remember that there's always going to be a trip receipt emailed to you at the end of your ride. Okay. So if it's a ride that happened off platform, if it was a ride that happened where an individual got in the car and the driver said, hey, I'll do this for $25 cash, and he or she turns the driver off, whatever the scenario is, if an individual says I used Uber and they don't have a trip receipt that was emailed to them in their email account, and or they don't have evidence of the trip in their trip history in their rider app, then again, it's another line of questioning of who requested the trip, who's got that information. And if you can get a hold of it, sometimes it can eliminate certain steps because you can pull a decent amount of information off of that trip receipt, right? Pick up, drop off, route, time, all that. And then at the end, linked accounts for all the law enforcement folks in the audience. When you submit legal process to us, you want to keep in mind that requesting accounts, let's say you have a targeted account that you're looking into or you've identified, requesting accounts that are linked by payment method and by device will provide you with any and all accounts that your target account has shared a payment method with or shared a device with, right? So if I have multiple rider accounts opened on the same device, those are quote unquote linked. And or if I've shared my payment method with other people to open up their rider accounts, those are linked. Again, pointing to other situations that on the Uber app, there's nothing nefarious about it. It's, like sending an Uber to pick up my wife to have her meet me wherever I am. I shared, my wife and I share a credit card. So that would mean that our accounts are linked. No big deal. When you're dealing with criminal activity, criminal enterprises, human trafficking, things like that, criminals like to share devices. They like to change devices. They like to share credit cards. They're stolen credit cards. So this can obviously lead to more information about how many accounts this, allegedly criminal account or rider account that's being used by a criminal is connected to. Uber application trip details. So this is a trip receipt, a snapshot. You see that blue underline? That's the license plate of the vehicle that provided the trip. That is not in trip receipt. So when you get your trip receipt emailed to you, the license plate will not be there, all right? It will, however, sit in your trip history, okay? So you open up your Uber rider app, you go to the little 3 horizontal bars, which is your menu, you open it up, you go to trip history. There, all of your trips will populate as long as you're connected to a network. You pull up one of those trips within the first, 48 hours that trip's completed, the license plate of the vehicle that the driver used to provide that trip is going to be there. Okay. So if you can get access to that as a law enforcement officer, that can be a first step in your investigative process. Now you run that plate and you find out who that vehicle is registered to. Keep in mind, a lot of individuals nowadays, I don't want to say, I don't know what the number is. So I don't want to say majority, minority, whatever it is. I would say it's consistently increasing of individuals who are renting cars to drive on the Uber platform for a variety of different reasons. My assumption, totally off the record, is that I'm guessing, certain individuals are saying either one, they don't have access to, a vehicle that they can use consistently, or they don't want to put the wear and tear on their own car, which makes sense. And a lot of these rental companies have made accessible to drivers, pretty affordable and cost-effective deals to rent cars on a temporary basis. And if they change cars, they obviously have to tell the Uber platform that they've changed cars with new license plate information and whatnot. And of course, they all have to be insured. This is a quick snapshot. I think I've said snapshot way too many times, but this is an overview of not an exclusive list of data that law enforcement requests, but certainly the standard data package and data requests that we get from law enforcement via subpoena, search warrant. The reason you see that kind of delineation of legal process across the top is in January of 2020, legal counsel advised that Uber should fall under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, or ECPA, and be classified as a communications provider, which meant that we had to be more specific in what you could get with a subpoena and what you could get with a court order. The court order is a 2703D ECPA order. A lot of local law enforcement are not aware of or have kind of dealt with that, which is why I just say, okay, deal with the subpoena and the search warrant. If you can get the search warrant, you can get everything, right? So you don't have to kind of delineate between what it is that you're trying to request, but sometimes the subpoena can be easier to get depending on your jurisdiction and your judicial process. But just again, take a look at this. A lot of it is, it's account information on riders and drivers. It's payment, which would include phone number, email address, payment information for drivers. That's driver's license, vehicle information, registration information, insurance, again, trip history, trip data, GPS. Remember, if you ask for GPS on, say, a driver, let's say a driver drove for 8 hours on a Saturday, and you want all that GPS information related to that driver activity during that 8-hour period, that's a GPS being every 2 to 3 seconds, right? So I try to do this math. I think that's 40 to 60 pings a minute. Is that right? Times that by, 60 minutes plus over 8 hours. It's very voluminous. It's incredibly detailed and it's super helpful, but just be advised, it's going to be a lot, right? So, but with that said, those GPS things are going to show you where a driver slowed down, right? Because if they stop at a location or pull into a neighborhood and it pings in that location, 150 times, you'll be like, oh, they stopped there for a few minutes. Why did that driver stop there, right? Also can show situations where an individual has made an allegation against a driver, but that driver, at the time that allegation is made, that driver's already on a trip heading in the opposite direction. So that can quickly eliminate, that rider's last trip and that driver that provided that last trip. So there's a lot of different ways to utilize that GPS information. If you have any questions on this, you can absolutely reach out to me. But just think it's important to kind of take a quick snapshot of this. And you can go to our law enforcement portal to alert.uber.com, and you can go into our help section and go to our FAQs. And this data that's available can pop up as one of the FAQs. Something we touch on too, Uber is synonymous with rideshare at this point. It's not the only game in town, but it certainly is synonymous, right? For whatever reason in our culture now, I guess over the last, I don't know what time frame it would be, but we've turned company names into verbs, right? Like I Googled it, and it came up with this. You don't hear people say I Binged it or I Yahooed it, but they definitely say I Googled it. And for whatever reason, they say I Ubered there. Hey, how'd you get there? Oh, I Ubered, right? Or I'm going to Uber. But clearly Lyft is a major player in rideshare. And also there are other rideshare apps like Via, which are kind of smaller in scale that kind of deal on major thoroughfares and big cities and whatnot. But again, and it also means that you have a lot of imposters out there, right, that are trying to utilize the way our platform works to their advantage to get unsuspecting individuals into their cars. But at the end of the day, that's not us, and those people didn't follow the process. And we do work with law enforcement on that front as well. Uber Law Enforcement, a public health portal, which you've heard me mention multiple times. Here it is. Here's a screenshot of what it looks like if you go to alert.uber.com. As you can see down at the bottom, law enforcement requests, public health requests. If you're in law enforcement, check it out. Take a few minutes, pull up the website, take a look at it. If you want to create an account, great. That account that's created when you utilize our portal is for the sole purpose of validating that you are law enforcement. So folks on this call who are in the advocacy space, you cannot create an account with our law enforcement portal. We do that for a reason, because we want law enforcement to be the one validate who they are and that they're sending us, valid legal process, warrants and subpoenas and whatnot. So it's a very important part of this portal that we make sure we sift through and find out, definitively that person is part of a law enforcement agency or a public health authority. But again, if you go to alert.uber.com, you can download our user guides for utilizing the portal and how that process works. You can go to our help section. We're always trying to build on features like this. An example of where we're trying to head with the portal is a feature we're trying to work on now would be a resource where law enforcement can log into the portal and provide a safety notification. So, hey, I don't want data. This is an emergency. I'll all I want to do is let you know that we're arresting a driver for XYZ crime, and they drive for, another rideshare platform, or we think they might drive for you, and here's their information. We thought it'd be helpful for Uber to know in case they want to take action. Super helpful resource, we think, and we still get these anyway. We just want to make it more intuitive. And that obviously would definitely help clearly in the sexual assault space, for safety reasons, because we're doing real time, criminal background checks. But clearly one of the best sources of information can be from law enforcement saying, hey, we're arresting this individual for the following crimes, and they drive for you. So our emergency requests resource within the portal, again, make sure you explain why it's exigent and what type of information you need. Just a breakdown of our legal process, as you see here, subpoena. We kind of talked about this in the other slide, but just to give you an idea of what that looks like. That subpoena is going to get you that subscriber info kind of as it's laid out by ECBA. The 2703D will get you a little bit more. The warrant's going to get you everything. Non-disclosure policy. The blanket policy for Uber is that, we disclose, all requests for information to our riders and drivers. But if law enforcement provides a non-disclosure order, clearly that bars Uber from disclosing the legal process or the nature of the investigation to the user, to the rider or driver. So this is a standard disclosure policy that I think a lot of tech companies have. Our law enforcement response team is very good about handling this type of, this particular policy. You're going to be prompted to answer this in the portal. When you submit a subpoena or a warrant, it's going to ask you as a law enforcement officer, as an investigator, are you requesting non-disclosure? Yes. Do you have a non-disclosure order? Do you plan on obtaining one? Do you not plan on obtaining one? You have to answer that question before alert will move forward with any of its procedures. They're not going to produce information to you, and they're also not going to obviously take steps to disclose your subpoena or your warrant to the rider or driver until you answer those questions. I would say to law enforcement, just basically assume that you should get a non-disclosure order each and every time you submit legal process to Uber. It's going to make your life easier. It's also going to make our law enforcement response team's life easier as well. If it's a warrant, you can include that NDO right in the warrant language into the affidavit, because it's signed by a judge, right? So that'll qualify as an NDO. If you get a grand jury subpoena, if it's not signed by a judge, it's not going to qualify as a non-disclosure order. But again, we will not move forward with disclosure until you've answered this information. And they're very adept and very astute and efficient at handling this disclosure policy, non-disclosure policy. And then of course, for exigent circumstances and emergency requests, we implement our own non-disclosure. We're not going to tell the rider or driver if you submit an emergency request for information that really is related to the platform.
Hey, Billy and Chad, we have about 5 minutes left and a few questions in the Q&A box, just a heads up.
Okay. Yeah, we can answer those. This is just a slide about, Uber drivers doing good things in the community, but happy to start answering the questions.
Okay, great.
I'll put up, here's our contact information on this last slide. So that's me, Billy Kuehl, Law Enforcement Operations. There's Chad, our email addresses, so please reach out. Chad, I guess I'll just read these out and then we'll figure out who they're directed at. I appreciate the safety measures that are put in place for the rider, but equally, can a driver decline a passenger if the driver feels that something could tumble the wrong direction? Are these safety nets for drivers too? Yeah, listen, at the end of the day, the driver accepts the trip request, right? And then the information that the driver gets on the rider is my name that I have on the account. So, in that sense, it's going to say Billy K, but I don't have a picture on my rider account. So at the end of the day, the driver doesn't necessarily know what the person looks like when they go pick them up, right? And so when the individual gets into the back of the car, if the driver pulls up and feels that they're in a precarious situation or they don't like the neighborhood, they can cancel and drive away, right? Now, once they allow the individual into the back of their car and begin the trip, now you're in the situation of, okay, if at some point do I feel uncomfortable, do I utilize my safety toolkit, the safety center, and call 911 because this rider is making me feel comfortable, or do I try to end the trip, right, early to see if the individual will leave the vehicle. So, yeah, I would say in terms of identification purposes, there's more information on the driver for the rider to verify. The driver doesn't have much more than the name unless the rider also puts a picture. Sometimes when I take Uber, I tell drivers, don't say, "Are you Billy?" because anybody can answer yes. So, to the driver's benefit, say, "And what's the name on the account?" And at the very least, if the rider knows that name, then they're affiliated with the rider account somehow. But to your point, once that trip starts, that's to Chad's point about, this is not a situation that was created by Uber per se. It's a person-on-person interaction, but you put two people in a car, depending on the circumstances, there's a lot of different situations that can arise. Again, an Uber driver can end a trip early. They can say they don't feel comfortable. They can also utilize, the 911 feature. But at the end of the day, yeah, for the way the platform is built out, they don't have a picture to verify that individual is the person who requested the trip, right? It can be anybody. How often do they do a background check on any particular driver? So there's one done initially before you get on the platform. And Uber was always doing its own background checks since the dawn of time, since it originated. We're such an old company, 10 years, but that's old in our modern society. But they were always doing their own background checks, right? As Uber began to get regulated as a transportation network company, as a rideshare platform, in all these state legislatures and local city ordinances and regulators, they all basically either signed on to or added to what we were already doing for background checks. That's done initially in order to ensure that you pass that background check before you get on the platform. And then we've actually the company that we partnered with has built out a ongoing real-time criminal background check process that's actually supposed to be triggered if some new information is registered in one of the databases that they utilize to collect their data. Then that is supposed to notify us as quickly as possible, right? So if someone gets arrested in fingerprints or court proceedings or judicial proceedings or whatever it is, get added to whatever database checker utilizes to pull their information together, we'll get notified in real time. Is Lyft as proactive in terms of law enforcement protection? I don't want to speak to what Lyft is or is not doing in the marketplace. They definitely have a law enforcement response team. I think it's ler@lyft.com. So you can submit that request through that email domain. I have not come across a law enforcement outreach team on the Lyft side. I know they do have folks at Lyft who are doing, policy efforts and whatnot, which do include work with law enforcement. I haven't run into an outreach team. That's not to say they're not doing it. But just to speak to Uber has felt the need for and has seen the benefits of this outreach, from the early days. I would say 2015 is when the first person was hired to do law enforcement outreach. And I think it's been a real benefit to the safety of the platform.
Billy, there was a question in the queue that I removed from the queue because I feel like you were answering it when you were talking about background checks, but I'm not sure if you covered it as far as do they get fingerprinted or not?
Oh, no, they do not get fingerprinted. So other than some unique, I'll use my favorite tech word that I feel like I learned when I started Uber, nuances to some bigger cities, like say, New York, that, I think has its own set of rules for how it does everything. Across the United States, and that was something that Uber kind of was kind of, how should I put it? They were insistent upon from day one that, hey, we'll do the background checks to the best of our ability. We'll do the most efficient ones. We'll do the most in-depth ones, but we don't feel that background, that fingerprinting is adding any, additional layer to that background check that they can't already access, with the information that they have at hand. So to that end, no, they're in the vast majority of markets. I think even with New York, but I'll just have to double check. I'd have to double check. Fingerprints are not required.
Billy,
Excellent.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Billy, I think now there is like a face recognition feature that's built into activating your
Yeah.
shift as a driver, right? So there's
Yes.
a biometric component, right?
And there is, Chad, that's a good point. I forget some of these, but there is a facial recognition piece that is, it was at one point kind of randomly prompted to drivers as they would sign onto their app. They would have to take a picture of themselves, and then that picture would be cross-referenced with the selfie they took to become a driver, and also the driver's license that they provided, when they applied. Now also in our post-COVID marketplace, they're prompted to take a picture of themselves without a mask and with a mask, so that across the board, like riders and drivers and the business kind of know what that driver looks like, and to ensure that they match the data that we have on the driver account side.
Excellent. I like to hear that, how Uber keeps up with the times and tries to, keep safety at the forefront. Billy and Chad, thank you so much for your time and expertise with sharing your time and expertise with us. We really appreciate it. Very good stuff there. Attendees, please see the chat box for a direct link to your webinar evaluation. We would appreciate you filling that out, and remember to click on launch to open the entire evaluation. And just as a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be posted on the Conference Center in a couple of days. So Billy, Chad, you guys stay safe out there, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.